We're going to move on now to our panel session for this morning on science and international collaboration. So if I can invite the panel members to come and join us at the front here in the seats, that would be great. And thank you. I think you have everyone's CV as already mentioned, but I would just like to introduce Susie Rabin, the Associate Director for Parliamentary and Public Affairs at the Royal Society of Biology. Susie is your chair for this morning's session, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Mark, and I'm very pleased to be here. I feel this is sort of a bit of a ranking of how many links days people have previously been to. This is very much my first links days. I only started with the Royal Society of Biology a few weeks ago, but it's great to see so many people here, and hopefully that we've got people online as well watching. We've got a really diverse range of speakers here who've come from a really quite wide remit across science. They're going to have an opportunity to talk for about 5 minutes each, and then we will take sort of a range of questions and discussions when we've heard from all our speakers. So I'm really pleased that we've got such a wide range of speakers. We've got Professor Dale Sanders, who is Director at the John Innes Centre, Professor Tom Welton, who is President of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and Professor Dame Jane Francis, sorry, it's a bit mouthful, isn't it? Sorry, who's Director at the British Antarctic Survey, and Dr. Rosalind Coggon, who is Royal Society Research Fellow at University of Southampton. They're each going to speak, and then we will have sort of questions and discussions, and I suspect Horizon may well feature, as it has already this morning. So firstly, I'd like to welcome up Professor Dale Sanders, Director of the John Innes Centre, as our first speaker.
Well, thank you, Susie. And as you mentioned, we have 5 minutes each, and I prepared 5 bullet points to speak at 1 minute each. Actually, big thanks to the 3 previous speakers who've covered a lot of what I wanted to say, and particularly in terms of collaboration, and particularly in terms of Horizon Europe. So I had planned to speak about Horizon Europe, but maybe we should push George on this afternoon when he arrives. Okay, so just a few words about me and my institute. John Innes Centre is based in Norwich, where we work on plants and microbes, so understanding the basic rules of life, but applying that understanding to the public good. And that's not just for the UK good, it's for international good. And I'll give a few examples of that later on. I just did want to start out with something vaguely controversial and invite questions on it. And that's the notion of the UK becoming a scientific superpower. So those were the words of our Prime Minister. They've been echoed by Chi, who's from the opposite side of the spectrum. And I just wanted to point out that, yes, of course, we want investment in science, but I think the science world has changed over the last decade. And when I became an academic in the early 80s, the science world was very much about particularly alpha males pushing each other out of the way and competing. Science is not going to make advances without decent collaboration, and that has to be international. And I think how we portray ourselves nationally, yes, of course we want to do excellent science, but I think portraying ourselves internationally as not better than everybody else, the scientific superpower, but wanting to collaborate, open doors as a place to do good science, I think is really important. Okay, I just wanted to touch on one science issue in particular, and this relates to an area that I'm pretty sure a lot of people in the audience don't have much affinity with, but which we do in the John Innes Centre. And this relates to agri-food. We are facing a huge crisis, and I'm not just talking about Russians walking off with 800,000 tons of grain from the Ukraine. I'm talking about the crisis that faces us in the next decade. That can only be solved internationally, and it can only be solved interdisciplinary, in an interdisciplinary way. And the nature of the crisis is actually threefold. There will be fourfold. There will be actually 2 billion extra mouths to feed on no more obvious agricultural land in the next 30 years. How do we solve that one? We have greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture accounting to no less than about 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. And you compare that with aviation, which is about 3%. So people talk about, you know, not getting a plane or something. It's tiny compared with the impact of agriculture. So how do we solve the impact of agriculture on the environment? And then the third aspect relates to producing crops which are resilient to environmental change. So I'm talking about heat and drought. For example, wheat doesn't undergo meiosis, which usually happens at night, above about 26 degrees. Temperatures are going to warm. How are we going to do that? And what I would suggest is that, and the fourth issue, and seeing Ian Boyd sitting in the audience here reminds me of the fourth issue. It's not just about renewables in agriculture, it's about non-renewables. So we all, as I think most people know, we require NPK fertilizer to enhance the growth of crops. The N bit is renewable. The P bit is not renewable. We have limited supplies of phosphate, limited supplies in quite select places of the globe. And we need to get thinking now about how to improve nutrient use efficiency. So what I suggest in practical terms, and I'll give you a couple of examples in a couple more minutes, of what we've been doing in Norwich. I don't think this can be solved by scientists alone. The 2 billion extra mouths are largely in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. And to that extent, we've in Norwich set up the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development. That's a collaboration between largely plant biologists like me, and also social scientists. And I can tell you, it's not easy. I had to learn a completely different language to understand how to interact with social scientists, but it's a way of getting the science out there in a socially acceptable way. And I think that's really important that we have those interactions. We've heard a lot about AI, and we are interacting with the Turing Institute and doing those things which have real resonance in terms of understanding genomes. And to that extent, we're collaborating internationally with Shenzhen in sequencing no fewer than 800 pre-Green Revolution varieties of wheat. The wheat genome is many times larger than the human genome, a lot more complex. It's hexaploid for a start. And it turns out that about 10% of genetic diversity in wheat was lost during the Green Revolution as they bred for smaller plants. And there's a lot of it out there that can be exploited. It's been a fantastic collaboration with the Chinese, a free interchange of data. And that has worked really well. Okay, I won't mention Horizon Europe. So I just had two other points to make. In terms of scientific superpower, what I would like to think of is that the UK is an exemplar of how to do things well and how to collaborate well, not how to be better than everybody else. And establishing those links isn't always easy, particularly, I think, with people who are well outside our disciplines, and including social scientists. And I must say, it's a shame Natalie Bennett is sick, I think, couldn't appear. But she and I had 2 letters published side by side in the Observer, and I thought, we're actually saying the same thing. It's the Greens and the GMO lobby. So I invited her up to the John Innes Centre, and it turned out we had so much more common ground than we thought we did. A lot of the objections were not biological. They were more to do with who controls the food chain. That's why we need to interact with politicians and think about that. The final point I wanted to make, I might have got is around EDI. And I think we need more BAME personnel in the biological sciences. I think we don't do enough at school level to attract them, or, and this is separate from the BAME issue, or put enough plants in the A level curriculum, or even any agriculture at all. agriculture, you know, when I was doing A-levels, sounded really boring. You know, why would one want to study that? It wasn't even there to study anyway. And I think the RSB could actually play a role in influencing the undergraduate curriculum and enhancing accessibility and enhancing not just the biomedical sciences. I'm not against the biomedical sciences, but remembering the whole spectrum of biology that exists out there. So I think that was what I wanted to say. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you. Many thanks, Professor Sanders. If I can want to welcome up our next speaker, who is Professor Tom Welton, the President of the Royal Society of Chemistry.
So thank you very much. And, you know, trying not to repeat what's been said, but a few points probably will come out again. And so, first of all, the Royal Society of Chemistry, we are a professional body of 55,000 members across the world. And I have never managed to find a country in which we do not have a member that isn't also a pointless answer. And so it really does demonstrate the global nature of science just in that, but also in things like activities. And so last week we launched this year's global experiment. And within a day, we had over 3,000 schools and individuals join that experiment, again, from every inhabited continent. So even at that scale, science is international. But then also at the same time, we're helping to build the scientific advice that's going into the new Intergovernmental Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution in the Environment. And again, the reason why we're involved in that is because of that global spread. And on that scale, science is international. On a personal level, yesterday, knowing I was coming here, I looked over my papers for the last few years. And in the last 3 years, I have published one paper that doesn't have the address of a university or business in another country on it. And that paper is a review article. And if you then take into account the nationalities of the people who are in my group, and then ask the same question. In my career, I have one paper that does not involve another nationality. And that again is a single author review article. And so without international collaboration, I would not be standing here. And the science that I advance of sustainability would not be where it is. We do have to mention Horizon, and we do find ourselves in a hugely complex and difficult situation that, for me, the answers are not scientific. The scientific arguments are clear. The scientific position is obvious. The problems are outside science, and they require solutions from people who are operating outside science. We've already heard what a huge, huge, huge thing Horizon is. But I'd like to speak up for small science. One of the ways in which the numbers can be squared relatively easily would be to dump large numbers of cash into very big experiments. I have nothing against CERN. I've visited CERN. If you get the opportunity to go and see it, I recommend you do so. But real progress is made in small science as much as it is, or even more than it is in large science. And that's what Horizon manages to do. In spite of being so large, it is enabled to fund small projects, collaborations of 2 or 3 groups that enable advances to be made that couldn't be made just by dumping money into one big experiment. So please, whatever happens, I would hope we remain in Horizon Europe. But if Plan B comes along, please remember the small science and don't just think about the big science. Whatever that alternative might be, it also has to think about that international collaboration. What I think would be a terrible, terrible travesty is if the money that is currently put aside for Horizon was put into the general pot, because it will disappear off into all of those important things that the general pot funds. And it will not replace the thing that is being lost, which is international collaboration. So it's vital, whatever Plan B is, that it maintains that. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the contributions that we make. And as we have just heard, yeah, it's true that the technical abilities of scientists and engineers in the UK are remarkable. And they bring that to their collaborations. But you have also heard just now something else, which is we bring something else, which is an understanding that the way in which we do science needs to change. I do not for 1 minute think that we have cracked the EDI nut. But you know, things like Athena Swan have beget SAGE in Australia. We see the Daphne Jackson Trust and its support for returners into academic careers being repeated around the world. We do offer a lot more than our technical abilities. And so again, my appeal is whatever the alternative is, hopefully it won't be an alternative, and what it will be an addition. Let it include that contribution every bit as much as it includes the technical contributions that we make. And I think you've heard enough from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Welton. Next, I'd like to welcome up Professor Dame Joan Francis, who's Director of the British Antarctic Survey.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for listening to us. So the British Antarctic Survey is a government research centre. We sit within NERC, and we have 2 parts to our mission. One is to do world-class science, and the other is to be the UK presence in Antarctica. So we work very closely, well, I certainly work very closely with the Foreign Common and Development Office. And when you work on a place like Antarctica, or the Arctic, we work on the Arctic, but I'm going to focus on the Antarctic over the South Pole. By absolute nature, it has to be international, because we certainly can't do research in the UK. So what we do is a lot of collaborative, very big science in Antarctica. And I'm going to cover 3 topics: the kind of science that we do, the logistics that requires international collaboration, and then the structures that the Antarctic community has put together to do this. I think the Antarctic community is very, very different from some of these societies that you've heard of and some of the ways that other people work. So let's go for science. So there are some very big multidisciplinary questions within the environmental science that we work on. We work on the melting ice sheets, the changing oceans, the marine ecosystems that have very low tolerance to change and, you know, may well be suffering in the future. Everything that we do has a global impact. Antarctica is a long way away, but if those ice sheets melt, they are going to affect us here, sitting on the edge of the Thames. In Cambridge, where BAS is based, is going to disappear as Antarctica appears. I'm a geologist. I wouldn't mind the rocks appearing in Antarctica, but at the cost of rising sea levels. So, for example, one of the big projects that we have is a big international collaboration. So I can't use slides, but you can all help me. So with a map of Antarctica, so if you hold up your left hand, you can make a map of Antarctica. That's right, thank you. So this is Antarctica, you may recognize it. There's the Antarctic Peninsula, which sticks up towards South America. And then this is the main big continent of Antarctica. and there's a chain of mountains across there. And Antarctica is fringed with ice shelves. So this is where the glaciers come off the land and then they float on the ocean. And what's happening in Antarctica at the moment, there is change in Antarctica, and that is having a global impact. Sea level is rising 3 or 4 millimeters a year, partly due to melting ice sheets in Antarctica. And what we have found by big international projects is that warmer water is going underneath the ice shelves. So not on top, it's underneath. And there's a big project here called the Thwaites Glacier Project, which you may have seen on the BBC website because it's got a lot of attention. And that's a really massive project. It's a bilateral, started off as a bilateral with NSF and NERC for many millions of pounds and dollars. It requires huge numbers of scientists to work together in very remote, challenging areas. We now have other partners involved, including the German Polar Institutes, Alfred Wegener Institute, which are very good partners with us, and also Korea, that has a great ship. So they work with us as well. So international collaboration is absolutely key to how you solve some of these big science questions in Antarctica. And going to Antarctica is also very challenging, as you might imagine. Gone are the days when it was one man and their skidoo or their dogs. Now we do big science and we need big logistics. So, you know, we have the RRS, Sir David Attenborough, to help us, and an aircraft to take us to Antarctica and work across the Antarctic continent. It's expensive, it's difficult. And the way that we manage it most effectively is to collaborate with the other nations that work in Antarctica. 54 nations work in Antarctica, believe it or not. And most of us collaborate together in some way or another. We share our ships, we barter a lot to share time, to share fuel even, to share aircraft time, to share scientific projects to work across this amazing continent. So I think collaboration is the only way forward. But we've also developed structures within the community to help us work together, which I think are quite unique. So Antarctica is a continent that is, doesn't have a single government. It's governed, if you like, by the 54 nations that work there through science. And we look after the continent for peace and science. So there's no warfare, no nuclear activity, and no mining as part of the Antarctic Treaty. And all those nations meet every year to ensure that the Antarctic Treaty is preserved for peace and science as much as we can. And within that structure, there's the Scientific Committee for Antarctic Research. So this is a structure, a body that brings all the Antarctic scientists together for research projects, but also for one big meeting every couple of years, so that we share all our results. All our data is made freely accessible to the rest of the world. There's nothing secret about working in Antarctica. The treaty ensures that, but so do the scientists. There's also a big group called COMNAP, the Council of Managers of National Antarctic Programs. So even all the logisticians, all the aircraft people, all the ship people, all the people that run the science and the stations in Antarctica, they get together as well. And through COVID, they were our saviors. They met very often by Zoom, and they developed protocols in which we could work in Antarctica to keep Antarctica COVID-free. And so those are a very important group of people that helped us work through these difficult times. And not just in the Arctic, but in the Antarctic, but in the Arctic too, there is also the European Polar Board. It's European, it's not EC. And all my European colleagues, which is a subsection, if you like, of SCAR, but we also work in the Arctic, we all get together to work to show that we can work together and collaborate and share everything, share the science, and share all the logistics as well. So I think Antarctica is an absolute perfect example of how collaboration is a must for working together and how it works particularly well. And there's one proviso I said to that. We've just come back from an Antarctic Treaty meeting, this year's meeting in Berlin, and the Antarctic Treaty wasn't quite consensus this year. It wasn't Russia and Ukraine, but it was China. And there are some nations now who probably don't want to work so collaboratively as the rest. So we shall have to see where that goes. But I hope that the Antarctic Treaty and everything it's about in collaboration will carry on for many years to come. Thank you.
Many thanks, Professor Francis. I'd now like to welcome our final panel member, Dr. Rosalind Coggon, Royal Society Research Fellow from the University of Southampton.
Thank you. I was actually slightly surprised to get my invitation to come and speak to you today with such illustrious company, but having been given a platform to talk about science collaboration, I'm thrilled to be able to do so. I am a relatively early career scientist. I won't say young because I'm not young anymore, but I have been involved in scientific collaborations internationally for over 20 years, and they have been fundamental to my career. And I also wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for international collaboration, be it small scale, the opportunity to go and work with one scientist for an 8-month postdoc in the US, be it large scale. My first big project was actually part of Antarctic research as part of the Australian New Zealand Antarctic research expedition. But for most of that time, as part of one of the most enduring, successful, longest running scientific international collaborations you've probably never heard of. We're going to have some scientific audience participation because I'm junior and that's what I do. If you've heard of scientific ocean drilling, put your hand up. There we go, not very many people. Scientific ocean drilling has actually been operating for nearly 55 years, and the UK has had a leading role in scientific ocean drilling for nearly all of that time. It is not well known. I try to think how to explain it to other people, and the starting point is usually to compare it to something like NASA, but that's not an international big collaboration, that's a national effort. So then I think about the other space agencies, and if we said that NASA was collaborating all its time with ESA and JAXA and all the international science space agencies, then maybe we're at the same level of collaboration. Perhaps the best example would be the International Space Station, because that's a space station, a ship, a bit like we use for our research. But the population on the space station at any one time is relatively small. Whereas at any one time on our main research vessel, we have over 100 people from all across the world living on a boat doing science. And that is for 2-month expeditions that run back to back. One expedition finishes, the next one starts. And that has been going on for decades. The reason that we do this is that the Earth's surface is 2/3 covered with water. We think of ourselves as being a blue planet. We actually know very little about what's beneath the oceans relative to what we know about the continents. So it's 2/3 of the surface of the Earth. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old, but the oceans are only 200 million years old. And that's because the oceans are constantly repaving themselves. New crust is being born at mid-ocean ridges, at volcanic ridges, spreading towards the continents and subducting in subduction zones where we generate horrific hazards that affect lots of people. But all the time that the seafloor is there, it's accumulating sediments. Mud is washing out of rivers, dust is being blown off the deserts, and biogenic material is settling out of the oceans. And those sediments that build up over time provide a record of how Earth has changed, how it has evolved, how its climate has changed. And only by going out to sea and collecting cores of those rocks using drill ships and drilling platforms can we access those records that tell us how our Earth works, how it has evolved, and what its future likely is. And so the only way we can do that is through scientific ocean drilling. So through 5 decades of research, scientific ocean drilling has made fundamental contributions to our understanding of the Earth system. It proved plate tectonics 50 years ago. It helps us understand how the plates move, how they generate huge earthquakes and tsunamis that affect millions of people. It has provided these records of paleoceanography, which we can use to ground truth our models of future climate predictions. And it has allowed us to discover a vast biosphere, probably the largest biomass on the planet, that actually lives in sediments and volcanic rocks deep below the oceans, never seeing sunlight. The UK's membership of scientific ocean drilling is through a NERC National Capability Subscription. So we pay money to the European Consortium for Ocean Research Drilling. And so Europe is one of the main members of scientific ocean drilling, with the main funders being the UK, Germany, and France, but many other countries also contribute to the European effort, including countries technically outside of Europe, like Canada. The other main funders are America and Japan, but we also have membership from India, Australia, New Zealand, China, Brazil, and other countries have joined and left over the years. What this allows us to do is benefit from pooled resources that are way beyond the capabilities of any one nation. If we didn't work together like this to access the oceans, we would not be able to have the facilities that we have. It is only through pooled resources, a relatively modest contribution from our own country, that we access a program that has a net value of about $150 million per year. The UK has taken a leading role in this since its very early days. And so we have been able to influence and benefit from the scientific discoveries, and also the ability to put scientists on these ships and do this research. We have benefited from links with technology and industry. Scientific ocean drilling is not about drilling for oil. As soon as people hear scientific drilling, they think that's what we're doing. That's not what it's about. But we have benefited from developments in drilling industry, and vice versa. Industry has benefited from both our research on how the basins of the oceans form and also technology that we have developed. It is a bottom-up program. So I said that there are these 2-month expeditions that run back to back. Well, the science that gets done is proposed by scientists. So I started a project 10 years ago. I put in a proposal when I had just finished my PhD, and I've just got back from 8 weeks at sea leading an expedition in the South Atlantic. So it's a long process of developing a proposal, meritocratic peer review, and then being able to sail if you're successful. You have an international team on board, and it is really, really valuable, not just for the science that we do, but as a training ground for our scientists. So I first sailed as a PhD student. Actually, I was really lucky. I sailed 3 times as a PhD student, and this was my 4th expedition that I've just done. The ability to live on a boat for 2 months with scientists from all over the world, immersed in a research environment, learning from your heroes who you've been reading their work for years, working with them closely, developing those relationships to take your science forward, has been fundamental to many, many careers of UK scientists. The programme is particularly good at fostering early career researchers. So I had sailed once as a PhD student, and I was encouraged to be a proponent of an expedition. 2 years ago, I had the great honour of being co-lead editor of the science plan for the next 30 years of scientific ocean drilling. And like I said, that's a bit like if NASA and ESA and JAXA and all the science space agencies got together and wrote one plan together for 3 decades, where they normally write their own individual ones for 1 decade. So it is a huge effort. And they didn't say to me, oh, you're only a career researcher, you can't do that. I think that collaboration is really, really important. It allows us to have opportunities to travel and meet other scientists and work together. It allows us to share facilities and opportunities, including funding opportunities. But mostly it allows us to share our ideas. I don't know a single scientist who operates as an island. We operate by bouncing ideas off each other. Usually the best ideas come from conversations on someone who's on the periphery of your field, who knows enough about your field of research to ask a challenging question that they probably think is a stupid question. And that really is what makes you think and change direction. Or you work with someone in a different field and you look for ways to work together, and that opens up new avenues and new ideas. Outreach is really important to international collaboration. I think one of the things that we're guilty of as scientists is being super curious about the problem that we're investigating, finding out the answer, and not being great at either telling our peers about it, but more importantly, telling the public about it. We are the recipients of taxpayer money to do our research, and we have a duty to share what we find with everybody and bring them on the journey with us. And my newfound passion is going into schools and teaching school children about how to core the seafloor. We're going to do an experiment next week where we make a layer cake and take plungers of cake to look at the layers of mud on the seafloor and what it can tell us. I think that one of the problems with collaboration is that it is still a rich nations club, particularly collaborations like this. And so wherever there are people, there are ideas. And so we shouldn't be excluding people based on the wealth of a nation, because we are therefore poorer for it, because we have excluded ideas. And so we have a duty to be more inclusive and actually support other nations as well and help them join these international collaborations that's so important to advancing as a global community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Coggon. I certainly like the idea of scientific exploration through cake. I think that's a takeaway idea we may take away ourselves. I'd now like to give an opportunity for everyone else to take part to answer some questions and maybe start a discussion. So we've got a couple of staff at the back with microphones. So if you'd like to put your hand up if you do have a question and let us know where you're from and what your question is. But if you don't mind waiting until the microphones arrive, that'd be fabulous. So, do we have any questions from our panel? There's one lady down here from Adam.
Hi, I'm Tracy Hussle from Manchester. I'm President-elect of the British Society for Immunology. I've heard a lot of encouraging things about collaboration, but also about small studies. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic actually brought together all the immunologists in that way, where we collaborated and moved things forward very fast. Is it possible in the future that we could have the collaboration, but also have the sort of small funding for transformative questions to be applied to larger collaborations? Because as you said, it's certain people that join in collaborations. Is there some sort of strategy in the future where we could have people coming with smaller questions to join in at the same time?
Thank you. Would you like to?
I'll answer on behalf of NERC, because this is not me, but many years ago, NERC used to have what they called the small grants, and that they were then abandoned. And so then we went to big grants, but they have brought something back recently at the request of scientists. I can't remember the name of it. Anybody from NERC here can tell me. It's Frontiers in something, which is a small, I think they're £100,000 grants, which is essentially to allow people to do that kind of trial testing, small science before it goes on to big ones. So they have a range now of grants from small to very large international collaboration.
I completely agree with the premise of your question, if I've got the premise right. I think there is room for that kind of thing, and I agree with your comments. And in my institute, we have a pump priming scheme, which relates to somebody has a good idea. Let's generate some preliminary data and think about how we're going to develop that good idea. But in the end, it does involve somebody sitting in a corner, having that good idea, and then thinking about how to get things on the road, and then developing collaborations. So yeah, absolutely space for it, I believe.
Do we have any more questions? I think gentleman in the blue shirt at the front.
Hi, Daniel Brayson from University College London. And we've talked, well, we've heard a lot about how we're going to fund science, but I'm quite interested in how we fund people, because as an early career researcher, I think this is a huge problem because there is a huge leak. I think that the academy makes huge promises to people coming into the system which they can't fulfill. And I just wonder if there's any solution to the problem that you could potentially foresee. I have my own opinions, and I'd be quite interested to know if anyone has any they'd be willing to share.
Well, I was going to say, as an early career researcher who hasn't lined up a permanent job yet, I'm probably not the right person to answer that question. But I certainly agree that there is a problem, effectively a brain drain, where people get through their PhD and then it's more and more competitive, and to the point where the competitive fellowships, which can be a fantastic stepping stone to the next level, are massively oversubscribed. And often you're competing with people who are probably too senior to normally be applying for those because there haven't been the jobs. So the last 5 years, things have been particularly tough. Having a system for keeping people in science and also not making people feel exploited would be fantastic, because there is this attitude sometimes that we should feel privileged to be being a scientist, and it is a privilege and it is a pleasure, but we are also a profession, and we should be supported to develop our careers. I'm not senior enough to provide the solutions. I just know what I want.
Could I make a comment? And then you said you had your own ideas. I mean, the maths are that if everybody is going in to do a PhD and then a postdoc wants to become a faculty member, for example, that's not going to happen. There are not enough positions going. And therefore, I think the answer to your question revolves around mentorship. And one of our speakers, I can't remember who it was, mentioned the importance of the way we bring on early career fellows, and it's alerting them to possibilities even outside of science. And I argued against scientific superpower earlier on, but I think this is one of the areas where the UK is ahead of the general picture. Certainly on science advisory boards I've been on in let's say other European countries, where people don't get the mentorship. And I think we're not that bad. It doesn't mean to say we can't improve, but it's not raising it's a question of not raising expectations and alerting people to alternative opportunities.
Just quickly then, one of the areas I think that I totally agree, there won't be enough careers in academia. Everybody thinks of universities and carrying on, but I don't think we do enough to educate young researchers for a life in industry. And that's where young, bright minds are needed, is in industry. And I think we have dropped the game a little bit in preparing researchers for a different kind of career, which actually, to be honest, will be a hell of a lot better paid and a lot more progressive than it is staying in academia. And I think there's a challenge actually for the research councils and universities and research institutes to open up a little bit more to industry and bring them on board so that we can work closer together for careers of young people.
So really, I mean, that was what I was going to say. It's slightly stronger, really. I think that what we need to do is we really need to frame our idea of what success is. And, you know, when I remember when I was a PhD student, you know, wondering about what success was, it was this idea that success was becoming a professor. And that everything else was, well, it might be okay, but it's somehow secondary and not what success was. But as you just heard, you know, my friends that went into industry are much better paid and have had much better work-life balance than I've ever had, and have had extraordinarily successful careers. And so we really do need to think about that much more strongly. And, you know, and something practical that I think that we should do. So one, we should stop making empty promises. We should make it very clear that there are not the academic positions that everyone with a PhD could possibly go. You know, we have to be honest about that. But also, I think, I could imagine something that would look a little bit like a doctoral training program for postdocs, which would involve people from industry, which would involve that mentorship, which would be about actually enabling the new success, which is, we keep talking about knowledge transfer. It comes up again. Knowledge is transferred inside people's heads. Knowledge transfer is people transfer. And really what I would say to this place is, if you want a successful, scientifically driven economy, what you have to do is reframe success so that people want to transfer out into the wider economy and bring that knowledge with them.
These are all great ideas, but on the ground, one supervisor is not necessarily open to the idea of giving time to do that professional development. So the messaging is top down.
So I've been a dean and a head of department, and I've faced that problem. And one of the things that we did at Imperial College is my institution. One of the things we did at Imperial College a number of years ago is we made 10 days of personal development training for postdocs a contractual requirement. And not only a contractual requirement for the postdoc, a contractual requirement for their supervisor. So in their annual review, part of their annual review would be, and how many days of personal development training did this postdoc take? Did that postdoc take? You're right, you have to institutionalize it. And, you know, in many places it is, and I would recommend it to be institutionalized everywhere.
I just wanted to add that I think it's really important to think about how you measure success, because my gut response to your question was I can't answer that because I haven't been successful. I haven't made it onto the next step. But at the same time, I've just led an expedition in the South Atlantic. I've edited what will be 30 years of scientific ocean drilling with the guiding document for it. And if that was my legacy in science, I would be thrilled to bits. And I've done that before I feel like I've started my career. So I think it is really important to reframe success. I also think it's really important to understand what your university offers, because we have the same offer at our university. We're supposed to spend 10% of our week doing personal development, but most of our staff don't know that they're actually supposed to do that. And it's both a supervisor problem and a student, PhD student problem and a postdoc problem. If you don't know what you're entitled to, you can't make sure you get it.
Thank you. I'm just conscious we'd like to get a couple more questions in before we break. So yeah, gentleman in the blue shirt there. Thank you.
Hi, Tim Juliet, Daphne Jackson Trust. Tom, you might have to recuse yourself for this question, as you're the chair of our trustees. Sorry, it follows on from the previous question in the sense of the EDI agenda and diversity in its fullest sense, and how we're trying to ensure that all elements of the research ecosystem contribute fully. Provocative question, I don't really have the answers. How well do we think we're doing, and what do we think we could do better? And I won't be minuting all your answers, so don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. So, British Antarctic Survey. If you think of Antarctic explorers many years ago, I mean, you know, the white man, young white man with a beard going down to Antarctica. I'm looking at Ian Boyd because he was part of the history in the past, but
I never had a beard.
You didn't. So British Antarctic Survey, of course, was a bastion of male prestige in the past, but it's changed radically. And we have a lot more women in the science area. And we have a massive EDI program, actually, to encourage greater diversity in polar science, because environmental science generally is not very good in terms of its diversity. So we have programs in schools, we have intern programs to bring in people from different diverse backgrounds into our research organisation to do small projects and encourage them, and they've been really successful and from all kinds of backgrounds. But I think we have recognised a lot of it actually has to go to school level. We have to get people in schools doing science, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, Diane.
Could I just add to that? I completely agree with what you said. I mean, we've been discussing a couple of issues. One's the kind of innovation issue for those in academia. The other is in EDI issues. Actually, I was on a panel for a DTP program a couple of years ago, where it was explicit that EDI issues were addressed. It was explicit that that innovation issues got addressed and industrial involvement. And a couple of well-known universities simply didn't do that in their DTP application. And that message is coming down from the, well, at least the research council I was working for. It is coming down from research councils, and they take a pretty hard view of it. So the question, your exam question was, how well are we doing, and was there room for improvement? I think we're doing a lot better than we were doing 5 years ago, actually. I think there's still room for improvement, and some people just don't get it. And but as long as the message is coming down from above, i.e. the research councils, the funding bodies, people will have to start listening to the type of question that you're asking, I think.
I will chip in. So the answer to the question, what could we be doing better, is very simple, because it's everything. And it doesn't matter which underrepresented group you might come from. You face disadvantage piled upon disadvantage. You know, there are papers that came out just last week showing that if you're a woman in science, you're less likely to be put on the author list in the first place. If you are on the author list, you're less likely for your paper to be cited. And you know, it's not that if there was a big lever in the middle of the room which said sort out EDI, we would rush and pull it. And that is not what the situation is. The situation is that those disadvantages come from a myriad of tiny day-to-day experiences, as well as the big things. And we really do need to focus upon changing the culture of how we do science, and starting off from the thing that you just said, you know, that it doesn't matter where you come from. doesn't matter what shape your body is, doesn't matter what color your body is, it doesn't matter what gender, what sex, it doesn't, and none of that stuff matters. Talent comes in all forms. And unfortunately, as much as people like me sit at the front of rooms and say it, we are not enabling that in our own institutions, in our own systems. And we really do need to just get that into everybody's head, so that we can move forward, no matter what your protected characteristic is.
Can we have one more question? So, gentleman there, please.
All right, my name's Arnie Akbar. I'm Professor of Immunology at University College London, and also the President of the British Society for Immunology. So I understand the younger people always have the same issues. All the older people have had to go through the same thing to get to where we are now. But the question then is, if you're older and you go towards emeritus status, or you go towards an aging part of the EDI spectrum, if you like, there's no society that pays a lot of attention to the welfare of the older members. And yet they could actually benefit societies tremendously by talking to the younger people, by contributing, not so much for personal gain anymore, but giving back and being included in the society. And that's one group that is totally ignored generally. All the societies here probably don't have any strategy to support their older members, yet they could contribute so much more to all the societies. I'd like to have some comments about that. Thank you.
First of all, let me make a confession. I have every intention of retiring early. In fact, I've already started making the preparations for it. And so it is a live issue for me. And actually what I would say, speaking up for the RSC, yes, we do. We have, a number of ways in which retired members and older members can engage with us. And in fact, much of our volunteering activity would fall apart if it wasn't for people that had the time to dedicate to our activities. But I think I think your question goes beyond literally just the societies, and speaks more to society at large. And it is important that we recognize that people are going to want to make different contributions at different stages in their careers. And, and I said at the beginning, I confess that because for many years, I should say, my husband is 10 years older than me. I've known for 30 years that I was going to retire early. But I felt I had to keep it a secret, because I felt that somehow it would mean, if it was known, then people would say that I wasn't sufficiently dedicated to my science to be worthy of getting that grant that I was applying for when I was 35, and so again, it is again one of these cultural differences that we really do need to sort out. That, yeah, do you know what? Your interests and your ambitions change as you grow and develop and age. And we do need to set up the system in a way that accommodates that. That doesn't mean necessarily that, there's a day that will come in 19 months' time when I will still expect to be paid for doing all the lovely bits of my job and have dumped on some poor junior member of staff all the rotten bits of my job, because that wouldn't be acceptable either. But we do need to find a way in which we harness the talents of everybody in the way that they want it to be harnessed.
I think what I would add to that is that we've just heard that problems that early career researchers have in planning their careers. I think there is never not a time for mentoring. I think mentoring is a fantastic opportunity for people across departments of all ages to help each other. I received mentoring sat here just half an hour ago from the people sitting next to me, and it's always there. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity to engage across departments.
Jane, any final comments?
Yesterday, I visited my old school and I talked to sixth formers, and who actually I was really surprised they were learning about Antarctica in the national curriculum for geography. Hooray! And it was quite amazing to talk to these bright young people and really encourage them. And I just got the most fantastic reception. And I think, I think all scientists should need to go out into the schools. I think it's about the EDI question as well. Whatever age you are, I don't think it matters. If you're really excited about your science, whether you're 99 or 19 or whatever, you should go out there and encourage people in your science. And I think schools are where it's needed the most. They need to see the scientists. the most.
Could I just add a comment and a confession for conflict of interest? I am about to retire at the end of August, and that is a concern about, you know, what does one do if one's still intellectually very active? And I completely agree with the premise of your question that there is scope among learned societies and organisation. Yes, you don't want, you know, old people hanging around who have nothing to say, but that's then another bit of kind of prejudice if you actually believe that old people necessarily don't have anything to say. And in terms of the science policy arena, for example, where there is that generally that maybe wider perspective than if you're focusing on your lab every day, you're thinking about the next experiment, there is the chance to kind of take a step back. I completely agree about the school, by the way. But there is more scope for emeriti to be used by the or to contribute to the community, I think.
Thank you. An excellent point to end on. I'd like to say a massive thank you to our panel. Yeah, so if we'd like to join hands in saying thank you to our panel for a really interesting discussion.
Thank you very much, everybody. And we've now got a short comfort break. Afterwards, we hope we've got the Minister coming to speak to us at 10 to 12. So could I ask you please to make sure you're back here by that time, ready for that address, and we'll see you shortly. Thank you. For those online, please stay with us.